But yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you all for attending. Good morning, good evening, good whatever, wherever. There are probably people here at all kinds of times. Yeah, as far as Tim's point about questions, yeah, I guess shout out is the best thing. Don't shout out too much, but you know, uh, definitely that's the easiest way to get my attention because I am incapable of tracking the chat and doing this at the same time. So before I start, I want to make just a few comments about the setup or the presentation, which is slightly unusual. Hopefully, you can all see this properly. There are two web browsers, and one is Firefox, and one is Chrome. And so it's two web browsers, two distinct instances, two distinct implementations of a web browser, which don't even share the same underlying engine, and that's deliberate. Even though that's a bit risky, because in fact this does work best on Chrome and Firefox. I know of at least one thing that Firefox doesn't do properly uh, for this due to some difference, and I haven't had the time to figure out what to do about it. But there's a reason for that setup, but I do want to call it out because it's germane for the presentation, and hopefully the presentation actually isn't formatted for this, so I'll have to adjust things so you see things get cut off. The other thing about the setup, what you see in each of these, you're seeing the same presentation. This presentation, of course, is at some level, of course, it is HTML, but it isn't really HTML. It's a live Newspeak document. And that's important for a number of reasons, largely because the presentation is also going to be a demo. So, what is this about? This is about this idea of online collaboration for free. So, online collaboration, I mean things like that you do with Google Docs or Google Sheets here, for example, with a presentation, if you were doing a presentation that way on the web. And you can sort of do this collaboratively with multiple people online. As opposed to offline, we'll talk about all those distinctions between online and offline collaboration as we go along. But that is what the argument here is that uh, why is it for free? It's for free because you, the programmer, do not have to do anything special to take advantage of collaboration. Essentially, the way this system is now set up, any Newspeak application that runs on the standard Newspeak UI becomes collaborative by virtue of running it on the collaborative platform, and no code needs to change, and if you're depending which format you're deploying, no byte needs to change, right? So uh, we'll demonstrate this as we go along, and yeah, so this it's a Newspeak document, and so let's get this thing to wake up, right? So obviously we have to reformat here. Right? Let's just, so you can see the slides. I'm going to keep those in parallel so you see that things are actually happening and syncing, right? Both of these are responding both to the change in the slide and then the editing of the slide. And what you see is one thing that doesn't happen is like um, scrolling is different. And that's a deliberate design choice because there's certain aspects of when you're doing a shared a collaboration that you don't want to synchronize. So people have different vision constraints. They want to zoom at different levels. They might want to scroll around differently. So it's a deliberate decision not to synchronize the scroll, though that can be done. But you can see that other things like changing the slide or editing the slide while I'm presenting and all that are actually synchronizing. And now, moving from this meta level to the actual contents of the slide, Newspeak's whole reason for existence originally revolved around this idea that I had 20 odd years ago of orthogonal synchronization. And that basically means that synchronization, uh, in this sense of synchronizing two instances of an application, of a program that are working in different machines and so forth, should be a feature of the programming system. It isn't something that you have to go and do and use a framework or program in a certain way and make certain calls to a library and design your whole thing around. It should be something that just the system can do for you. And now let's just say to garbage collection, right? You don't have to actually make calls to deallocate and manage memory. Uh, it's a similar idea, right? So this was a goal back since 2004. The first public talk I gave about that is literally almost 20 years ago at UPSLA in October of 2005. So what are we trying to achieve here? Uh, the basic idea is we're not there yet, but the idea was all along, and some of you may have heard this before, was that we wanted the best of cloud and native environments. And this gets summarized in a slogan that is always available and always up to date. And what does that slogan mean? It means that, for example, always available means a couple of things. One is, okay, cloud applications are not actually always available if you don't have a network connection, or if it's just flaky or slow, or if you have to pay too much money for it, like you get on a plane and do you really want for those few hours to shell out that money for, and then you both pay. In that case, it's both expensive, flaky and slow, or unavailable, and you're still paying for it. So definitely there are situations where the network isn't working. There are also situations where you do have a network, but you still don't have your connection to the cloud because whatever cloud service you're talking to is down for whatever it's being DDoSed or they had some other failure. And so this doesn't happen, of course, with a native application that's just running on your machine. Uh, this is also the motivation for a whole movement that came much later called local first, uh, that basically makes many of the same arguments and says, yeah, we want to be able to run this thing, on our machine independently of whatever happens on the cloud. And yet we also want to be able to collaborate and all that kind of thing. Now, there are subtleties and differences between some of the things the local first people are saying and what I was saying. Because, well, for example, the local first people argue also that you don't want, you have this problem that if you're using a cloud application, it changes on you and I want my old 1995 version of the software to keep running exactly as it did, and you can take it out of my cold, dead hands when I die. And that's definitely not what I'm saying. I actually think that there's a bit of there's a real tension there, at least, and in my mind, a real contradiction. But well, we may say more about that later. But basically, this is related somewhat to local first, but this is idea that cloud isn't the solution to all your problems. On the other hand, it is also true that if you're running a native application, it is also in some sense not always available. It isn't available if you forgot your machine at home, or if someone stole it, or broke it, or hacked it, or you have a crash, or all those things. There is a reason that the cloud has been so successful, precisely because it deals with those issues. So basically, this is a case of having eating your cake and having it too. And Alan Kay once said, among the many things that Alan has said that I remember, is that he's a eat your cake and have it too guy. And I think that's actually a useful perspective because what that does is it forces you to think of new solutions. It's a great way to create a research agenda, is to say, well, we have these things that are supposed to not work together. Can we make them work together? And what does that do? So we want always available in both those senses. And we also want always up to date. So that, as I said, is different from local first because local first says, yeah, where you can keep your old application. Um, and I definitely am not saying that. I'm saying that we want the latest and greatest version. There's a real problem with this idea that you're collaborating and you're doing it but you're not updating the software because if one side updates the software and you didn't, how are you going to collaborate? There's going to be discrepancies. There's going to be issues. So I don't really think you can do that. But it certainly is an attractive argument to some people. But this is basically about syncing the code as well as the data. So the application is is being, is the same application. And when it changes, it changes for you automatically everywhere. So this, of course, relates to the ideas of programs as data, which go back to all the dynamic languages from Lisp and onward, and dynamic program update, changing code on the fly, something small talkers are familiar with, but also brings up the classic issues of mobile code, security, whatever. So there's a lot of agenda here, which is partly why much of it hasn't happened yet. So, uh, more about orthogonal synchronization. Uh, Synchronization, again, there's this idea of online and offline. So the offline is kind of local first, right? The idea is that I can go offline, there's no network, and I can keep working, and then I'll come back sometime when the network comes back or the site comes back or whatever it is, and I'll be able to pick up where I am. That is a harder thing than the online collaboration. Online collaboration is the focus of this talk because that is largely working now, and that's what you do with Google Docs or things like that, right? But that if you go online collaboration doesn't work if you're offline, right? By definition, you're offline. And the problem with offline collaboration is now, if you go offline, someone else may continue to do work, and now we have a merge conflict, and we actually have to sync these things. It's a different problem than if we're working both online and we're keeping both of these in sync, and we know that they're constantly being, you know, uh, essentially made, they're the same version, is what I'm saying. Now, they don't diverge. Once you go offline, they can diverge, and you have to have a way of resolving that divergence, and that's the hard problem. So at this point, we're really talking about number one because it's much easier. There's At the end of the talk, I'll discuss what my plans are for finally getting to number two. So this is where Croquet comes in, right? So Croquet, many of you probably know, being small talkers, was originally a small talk system back in 2003-ish, I'm gonna say. Uh, and it's a really interesting system that it did all kinds of things. And in fact, it has the same problem that I'd argue Smalltalk has and Newspeak has of over innovation. There's so many interesting things are going on that it's actually a problem for the people who out there who are just overwhelmed by they have a difficulty relating it to what they know because too many things have changed at once. So it was a 3D live virtual environment and it was synchronizing and all these things. And uh, the relevant part of it is the synchronization. So Croquet was an environment where basically what happens is that multiple distributed instances can keep working and they're all held in sync. And the way it works is that every client, every distributed instance sends events to a server sometimes called a reflector, and that server basically orders all the events in a standard way, basically acts as a global timekeeper so that and the local clients don't do anything immediately when something happens when you click on a button or move a cursor or anything. You don't immediately respond on the client. You send an event describing this action at some level of your application. You send that to the reflector. The reflector will then broadcast this back to all the clients, including the one that initiated it. And only when they get that signal will they actually do the action that was supposed to happen. Now, because the server's task is not to look at this data or anything, it's just to order it in one consistent order so that everyone sees the events in the same order, no matter how slow their connection is or how slow their machine is and things like that. And so everybody's going to execute in lockstep. And that means that they will continue to do exactly the same thing, and therefore they'll be in sync. And there's lots of subtleties to this, Like what happens if I have a random number generator and things locally on my machine? So it's of course trickier than it seems, but the idea is that all the clients are executing in lockstep deterministically the same code. And this system of bouncing it off a reflector is that makes sure that all the events that everyone sees are in the same order is the key thing to that. So that's nice. There is that again, this is not a local first system at all. This is very much an online system because if you're not online, you're not talking to the reflector, you're not getting events back, and so you're frozen. Nothing can happen, right? So the current generation of Croquet is called, and the latest it's a startup that has now been renamed and is all called Multisync, and it's in JavaScript and it runs on the web. And it is a framework that you have to work with. So there's a certain way of working with it, of organizing your code using their little JavaScript libraries. And if you follow that thing, it works amazingly well. So that's Croquet, and I'm using that in some sense in the solution, but I'm using it in a perverse way. So Newspeak on Croquet, if you will, is uh, is built on this idea that we're going to not have the application organize itself around Croquet. We're going to take the application as it is, and therefore we're going to move the responsibility of of dealing with Croquet to the UI framework primarily, to the platform, because some things actually aren't necessarily UI, but for the most part they fall in the UI. So if you think about it, uh, rather than having sort of semantic level events for your application that you send back as the Croquet folk actually recommend, we're going to do this at a lower level. Every UI widget that involves a user interaction is going to actually work by sending an event to Croquet. Croquet will set up a Croquet JavaScript program that will bounce that back to us to all the clients, and only then, when all the clients have heard, yes, this button has been pressed or this slider has been moved or whatever it is, will they do their thing. So it's all in the UI framework, and the application programmer doesn't have to think about it. And as long as the UI has exactly the same interface, the same protocol as the original UI framework that the platform has, then the clients are it's a completely transparent. The clients don't need to change a thing. They just, they have their UI calls that they have, and they work the same way, except that they are running through the system and bouncing it off and synchronizing it. So the net effect is that we're getting the collaboration for free. Any Newspeak application, pre-existing, never designed, essentially collaboration oblivious, not designed for collaboration, not thinking that it could ever be a possibility, not coded in any way, not a single character changes, and you run it on this version and it's collaborative, which is exactly what's happening here. This is Telescreen, the Newspeak presentation manager, and there's nothing about it that knows about collaboration, right? Now, how technically I'm doing this is slightly interesting because it's just easier with Newspeak than it might be in most other languages. Because we're using a thing called class hierarchy inheritance. So probably most of the people who are in UKST have heard me talk about Newspeak before, but I'm not sure that everyone on the call has. But Newspeak differs from Smalltalk in one of the ways it differs is that it allows classes to nest, and nested classes are essentially dynamic properties of objects, just like methods are. And they're accessed through essentially message sends. And that enables us to subclass. Well, first of all, it enables us to define an entire library, like the UI library, as a single class with a bunch of nested classes. And I'll show that in a moment. And then you can then create a subclass of this UI library and override pieces of it such that it has the same protocol but has different behavior. So let's take a look and see how that works. So here is, I'm hoping this is not too small. Can everybody see the code, or should we try and enlarge that a bit?
That
Fine
looks
for
fine
me.
to me.
Okay.
Okay, so if anyone can't see, just yell and we'll try and make it bigger. So this is the hopscotch for HTML5 class, which is the UI that we're using. And the thing to note here, yeah, it's a class, and inside it is a bunch of stuff like these are the instance variables. These are nested classes. So things like buttons or canvas or checkboxes or color pickers or various lower level widgets like column composers that allow you to stack things vertically. Basically UI stuff, right? Things you'd find in a UI library. These are all nested classes inside of this class. So we can open one of them. And yeah, since we're not scrolling, just to show you that it works, I'm gonna scroll it back in the other one. Right, so this is button fragment. That's a widget that represents a button, and and we're going to go through a bit of the mechanics of how this works. So I'm going to show you a bit of how this is. So this is a class button. It has a label which shows what the button, what the button's purpose is. That's the text that the button shows. And the important thing is there's an action, which is a block, a small talk closure or a Newspeak closure in this case, which is the action it's going to take when it's clicked, right? And the way this works, it translates this to HTML basically. So there's a thing called create visual that creates the actual HTML that represents it. And you don't really need to read this awful stuff, but it's creating JavaScript, right? So basically it's going to create a button element. So it's talking to the JavaScript document, this guy. And I'll note, right? Note when I selected this and highlighted it, it highlighted in the other side. So this is fairly low level. So things like selection and stuff also have to be synchronized across instances. It's creating a button element, an HTML button element that'll do all the real work. And it gives it, the important thing is it gives it a click handler, and that handler basically calls the action, right? It says action value here, and that will right, this guy, right? So that's basically invoking the closure that we sent, which is what the button is supposed to do. And the click handler that we're giving the HTML will do that. So because of the Newspeak runs on top of the web, we can talk to JavaScript, right? This particular version is the WASM version, so it's a Newspeak VM written in C++, translated into WASM using mscript and blah, 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 blah. But in the end, you can talk to JavaScript. And so we can talk to the DOM, we can do all these calls. This is Newspeak code, but it's basically doing the standard DOM. These are DOM calls like append child and things like that. Right? So that's just a button. That's the obvious way a button works. So if we go to the next slide, we can look at how we override this to get the behavior that we wanted with Croquet. So here we are. This class hopscotch, it has a superclass. This is Newspeak syntax for the superclass. That's hopscotch for HTML5. Now there's a bit of mechanics here because how did it get to see that? Newspeak doesn't have a global scope, etc. It doesn't really matter how it got there, but essentially this class here, hopscotch, will be a subclass of the basic UI class hopscotch for HTML5 that I just showed you. So it's extending the entire UI library through one class. Now, and inside you'll see, right, it's got a bunch of classes again. These are classes that are overriding the corresponding classes in the superclass, right? So we're doing override not of methods, but of classes. And if we look at something like button fragment, you'll see that it says that it inherits from super button fragment, right? So we're actually so we're going to inherit all the things that the regular button does, but we're going to mess with it. We're going to override its behavior. And because this is all accessed by message sends and self-referential, that means that anyone who uses button anywhere else in the framework will get our button, the overridden button, and so forth, right? It's all going to work like normal inheritance does. So a couple of things to note. This one has an ID. That ID is important for because we need to identify this button as opposed to other buttons when Croquet processes the events. And we've overridden action. So action in a regular button was an instance variable that held the closure that was which was the behavior that the button should have. We've overridden the button that instance variable with a method because in Newspeak, instance variables are always accessed by method calls automatically, right? Everything is accessed by a method call, right? It's message sends all the way. And so it's message oriented in the sense of, say, self or what Alan intended when he said that Smalltalk should have been message oriented. And so we can override slots with methods. And what does this method do? It no longer involves the original action in any way. Instead, the block it's returning a closure, right? It's returning a block. But what it's doing is it's called to publish. Now, publish is again a JavaScript API. Whoop, what was that? Hopefully that was
It sounded haunting, didn't it? But
yeah, that was hopefully someone's mistake. Um, but publish is an API from the JavaScript Croquet library, and basically it's publishing a Croquet event. And this identifies this as oh Christ. Uh, so
Sound, sounds like a very young voice somewhere.
yeah, someone obviously is testing the higher frequencies of the range. So what we're doing here is right, we're publishing this event. It identifies it as a Newspeak button. It tells it it's a click event, right there. And it gives it the fragment ID. And so this event, so it's not going to do anything, right? When I press this button, it's not going to actually do whatever the button was supposed to do. It's just going to send this event up to Croquet. There's JavaScript code in Croquet that expects this event and then sends it back or sends a similar event back to all the clients, and they're all listening for it. That gets set up here in setup Croquet view. Setup Croquet view is called, this code gets called when the object gets in. All of this code in Newspeak is the object initializer. It gets called when you create the object. So the first thing we do before action has ever been pressed is set up Croquet view. And set up Croquet view basically does a subscription. So it subscribes to a Croquet event. So all these buttons are listening to a Croquet event. The subscribe call takes care of passing in the fragment ID and basically says we're listening for a certain event. And what's our handler? Our handler is super action value. That is, when this event happens and Croquet lets us know we're subscribing to an event, and when it happens, we're going to call this super action, which is that's the actual action that we wanted to happen. That's the actual block that's supposed to execute, and we're going to execute it when this event happens. So someone clicks the button on a particular client. An event goes up to Croquet, the reflector sends it back, all the clients get this event, and they all call super action value, and then they actually do what the button is doing. So that's the basic idea, right? This is how Croquet is supposed to work, but we're doing it at the level of individual widgets. And we can do this conveniently because we can do all these fancy overrides. You could do this in any language if you were willing to go through enough pain. Because if you think about it, the exercise, you basically have to fork the UI package and rename everything and create new subclasses with the original name so you preserve the API and getting all the self-reference to work correctly, because when you rename and when do you use the don't rename so that you get the correct new version, you all have to do that by hand, right? So it's fairly painful. Class hierarchy inheritance is really cool and makes that really easy. But that's basically how that's working. And as a result, we now have a library that will basically talk to Croquet and do the synchronization. Now, there's one more thing we have to do.
can I ask a quick question?
Sure, by all means.
That override, do you have to do the same override for like all the different UI classes, or was it like that action is common amongst all of them and you just do it in
No,
one?
no, no. This what I showed you was just button because it's the
Right, yeah.
easiest and simplest that I can easily talk, in a talk, right?
So
If
you still have the pain of going through all the different types of widgets and
right,
doing
so
each
here, this
one.
is so the advantage of the Newspeak setup is because it's just me, the UI library is not very elaborate. It is
Right.
no doubt missing all kinds of features, and so it's not as gigantic a task as maybe to do it with a full commercial grade thing, but it's the principle is the same. So you can see we've overridden buttons and checkboxes, and CodeMirror is the thing that we use CodeMirror editors for better or worse, and so they're wrapped up in a thing, and we have to manage that so that we can edit text and things. Color pickers, date pickers, da 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 da, drop down menus. That one is a complicated one.
Yeah,
Uh,
got it.
it's all there. So all of these.
And presumably if some of the UI elements share some common things, I suppose you'd still have you couldn't yeah, you'd still have to override the sub nodes, wouldn't you? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So certainly they share. So there are more classes than are here, right? If we go back to the original hopscotch, there are things that didn't need to be overridden.
Yeah.
Right? It's only if you actually have a direct interaction.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Right. So yes, so it is all of them, um, and so it is not a completely, it's not a small task, but it isn't huge, and it's certainly a lot easier than again if you'd have to do that in any UI library. If it's bigger, you'd have a few more cases, but mainly you'd have to do. It's a lot easier to override them than to copy the whole thing and start, doing all that kind of
For
stuff.
sure. Yeah.
Gilad,
Yeah.
just a question on the reflector. How does the reflector know who to send the events to? When you open a Newspeak page, does that register with a reflector or something like that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, because I've squished the browser down, you don't see the full URL, but basically the HTML, the web page that we're accessing for this is not so. There's a regular Newspeak that doesn't do this, and it has an HTML page that basically is a wrapper around them, script and stuff to run the WASM and so forth. So all of that still happens, but the web page here also involves a pile of JavaScript that is doing all this reflector stuff. So uh, it signs up to a session, and depending on how I formulated the web page, either the session is on the URL or I can pack it into the web page as a constant, whatever. But yeah, all that mechanics happens in a bunch of HTML and JavaScript.
Okay, but the reflector is aware of who is open on an equivalent page. So it
Right, because one of the so each of these pages is executing essentially JavaScript locally,
yeah.
but one of the things you do there is a JavaScript call that talks to Croquet and basically registers you as
Mm.
one of the clients. So the reflector knows all its clients, it maintains a list of subscribers, all that kind of stuff.
What happens if a client goes offline and it doesn't process the events that were
Oh, we're going to talk about that. Yes, this is an interesting topic, definitely. But that is a very important thing. So we are going to talk about that um, shortly, if you can hold off. I mean, I could start telling you now, but we'll get there very soon. It is a very good point. Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to go back to what's the next thing we have to do? So we have a library that does this. Now we're saying we're doing this for free. All our existing clients, all our existing code, all our existing UI applications can just benefit from this, right? So how do we get them to benefit from this? If you were doing this in a conventional language, you'd have to relink it or recompile it, right? In Java, you'd have to compile it against this different UI library. If you were doing it in a Smalltalk image, you'd have to have an image that had this UI library, then load your application into that image, and depending how you set it up, so it wouldn't try and have recognize the old library as a dependency, you have to to link it in, right? You have to distinct copy. Um, a nice thing about Newspeak is that it's really just the deployment. It's literally the same. In some cases, you can make it so the same bytes work for you when you load them. You just have to load them into a different platform. And so I'll say a few words about how Newspeak platforms work. right? So this is our platform class right here, and it the idea of the platform is right in Newspeak. The platform is reified as an object, right? It's an object that gives you all the services that you would usually get from either a standard prelude or the globals in Smalltalk or something like that, right? Your standard library, all encapsulated in the uh, in the platform object. So what does a platform object look like? There's basically it has methods that allow you to access various library instances that provide things like collections, right? So if there's a slot called collections, you access that as a method. When you say platform collections, you get the collections object, which is the complete collections library, which you can then ask for lists or maps or what have you, right? Uh, this is true for the kernel, for actors, all kinds of things that you can see here. JavaScript, right? So we have an interface to JavaScript. You talk through the JavaScript object JS, which then gives you the browser's the page, the global namespace of JavaScript, and you can go access things from there. One of the most relevant thing for us here is Hopscotch. Hopscotch is the name of our UI framework, and uh, it's actually so when you do UI calls, you ask the platform for Hopscotch, and you get the UI library, the instance of that class that I showed you earlier, and then you ask it for things. But here we're using Hopscotch for Croquet. So if you look at Hopscotch, it's actually Hopscotch for Croquet. Hopscotch, that's the class with the overrides that I showed you earlier, right? And Hopscotch for Croquet is created on the line above. And that setup means that basically instead of getting the usual hopscotch that the platform gives you, we get the overridden library, right? That's the only difference. This is acting as the normal platform, except it gives you a different UI library. And with that platform object, you will get the different behavior. And since all of Newspeak things are always effectively parameterized on the platform object because there is no global namespace, you have to pass in a platform object to get at this stuff. It might be useful to look at the regular platform object, the non-Croquet one, just to make this clearer. So you notice I have, this is the presentation manner as a live Newspeak document. The document system incorporates the IDE so that you can write interactive document apps. And so we can go and find like all the code. So we'll look here for runtime, this guy, and it has a platform, right? So this is the normal non-Croquet platform. And it looks the same, kind of saying there's kernel collections, all these things. But Hopscotch, right? There's no Hopscotch for Croquet here. Here, Hopscotch is just Hopscotch for HTML5, the first class I showed you with all the UI stuff in it. And that gets instantiated here. And then when someone talks to the UI, asks the platform for Hopscotch and gets the regular UI behavior. So all we've done is make sure that this guy gives us the other library, right? And that's again it makes it a bit easier than having to think about relinking and so forth. Actually, what I wanted here, where was our presentation? Here we are. Right. So those are the two things that I wanted to highlight in the sense that they're just a bit nicer in Newspeak to do. And especially the class override stuff, it's nice enough that you might not have thought of even going through this exercise if you didn't have these features that would make it natural for you to think about doing these things. Okay, so that is the essence of the mechanics, but of course there's more stuff to all this, as Graham alluded to. So snapshotting, right? Let's talk about that. So I'm deliberately hiding the tab with the Firefox stuff, and the reason is so Graham asks what happens if that one of the clients goes away or shuts down or things happen to it. And so the basic Croquet philosophy was we're online and we're getting all these events and so forth. And you know what? If you come back, then right, you should have you've if you've all gone offline, you theoretically got frozen because you can't talk to the reflector anymore. And when you come back online, you'll all the messages in the reflector will come through in the same order that everyone else, and you'll catch up essentially. Now, this doesn't capture what happens if what if the whole thing disappeared or whatever, but that was the original idea. But there is a weakness there that is, okay, suppose you're doing this for like some long-lived application, like a chat room, and it's open for years, and people, come in and come out, and every time you just open this tab again, are you going to have the last 3 years of everything that happened there replay in order to catch up? So that seems a bit of an issue. And so what the current Croquet does is it has this concept of snapshotting, and it will, I think, every 5 seconds or so, uh, serialize what it considers your model. And when you come back, it'll just deserialize that, get you back to where you were when you went offline. And the only catch up you have is the last few events while this is happening, and then you're back in sync with everyone. So to make that maybe a bit clearer, the Croquet has this idea that the source of truth is what they call the model, is a bunch of data that you consider the basis of your application, and the view, all the UI or anything else that you can derive from that, you compute. Now, this is great, and but this is a problem in this environment, in the Newspeak environment. Why is it a problem? Because we are not doing things the way they were meant to be done. Because we're doing all this in the UI, essentially in the view, and all our real estate is the Newspeak heap, which is not in JavaScript and not part of a Croquet application in the traditional sense, where it was designed to put its relevant data in this model and so forth. So we don't. So initially, the first implementation of this didn't. The model was empty. There's nothing. I don't. Everything is stored in the Newspeak heap. I don't have a real model. And in fact, I gave a demo of the system last year at Splash, and it wasn't, and that was one of the issues that I hadn't tackled yet, which was that if you went online, everything died because uh, what would happen is Croquet would try to bring you back from its snapshot, but its snapshot was a model that was empty, so it had no data. The Newspeak heap it had no concept of, and so when it tried to come back, there would be nothing to come back to really, right? So you couldn't go offline. You could only do it live, and you could never really go offline, or else you'd be dead. So there are a couple of ways you can solve this. Essentially, you have to have your data in a model that Croquet can access and serialize. So one idea is, say you were in a Smalltalk image, you basically give them a Smalltalk image, right? So we have Smalltalk usually has a great snapshotting system, and you just give them back, and that's the state I was in, and bring me back to that, and that's fine. There are a couple of issues with that. The first issue is that Newspeak doesn't have an image in the current implementation. So that kind of makes it rather difficult. Even if you did, it may not be such a great idea because they're doing this every few seconds. And do you want to take your whole image every few seconds, save it, send it over the wire, and then when you come back, send it, right? It's not clear that that would necessarily perform terribly well. So what do we do instead? Again, it's not a new idea. There's this idea that I know has been around since the 70s, probably, of journaling, right? So you, instead of recording your data, you record the operations that happened that brought you from some initial state to your current state. So basically, our model from Croquet's perspective is the set of events that we send to Croquet. So we record all our events and replay them. So we're basically reverting to the model that doesn't have the snapshotting in a sense, and saying, okay, when you come back, you'll give us all the history of events. That's what you'll reconstruct, and then we will actually replay them on our side. Essentially, the JavaScript code that sits in the page behind this, and that happens, and that mostly works. This is, as I said, this is all still not quite done. So we're going to hope that it works now, right? So now this is exactly what should be happening, is that we're hoping that Croquet comes back. And what actually happens here, yes, we are back to the same slide. But what happened behind the scenes is we started from the original document, and then all the operations that I've done of moving the slides forward, opening the different pieces of the IDE, looking at the classes, all that thing got replayed, and we should now be in exactly the same state. In fact, let's be brave and check on that. Let's look at the history. Yeah, we have the same history, right? So this image which just came back has looked at platform and has looked at runtime for, right? It's looked at all these things. It's the same history. So replay mostly works. I've noticed a few glitches which I still have to debug, which is why I'm sometimes nervous about it. But basically, this is essential so that yeah, you can close a tab and come back to things, or close the browser and open it on the time, all that kind of stuff. So Graham, I hope that answered your question. Thank you. Okay, so that's one set of issues that make it a little complicated. Um, what else do I want to talk about in the next, yeah, I guess 10 minutes or so, hopefully? One is external system state. That's an interesting one. So what happens, all this is great as long as everything's executing in lockstep, but what happens when you do things that depend on, say, the local file system? Or there are other things like that, right? Well, we don't want that, so we'll just make this guy bigger now. I think you can see that it synchronizes, right? Local storage in the browser is another example. Things like that. So what do you do then? Let's take a look and see what happens there. So. One example of that is, suppose I want to upload stuff from the file system, right? I have the whole Newspeak IDE, which again was not designed to be collaborative in any way and all pretty much works now with the platform. As you can see, it's synchronizing. What do I do if I want to load new code into the IDE? So let's do that. Okay, you're missing the fact that I don't know if you're missing. Can you see the menu in the Firefox browser? In the other browser?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, because I can't, because I have this stupid Zoom stuff in front of me, so it's hiding that. So I just want to make sure that you see. So the menu opens in both of them, and compile files. What that does is it models, reading in a file as an upload, right? And we're in a browser. It's kind of convoluted how you can actually read files. So we do that, and uh, I get, and hopefully this is showing because I think I'm sharing the screen, right? So you can see I've got a file dialog,
Yep.
right? Right. Now the thing is, if we look at the Firefox browser, oh, that's not what I wanted to do at all, but this is what I want, right? I want to see, yeah, collection, hello. Can I scroll this? No, it's not showing me what I wanted to show. Somewhere down here, okay, there we go. There should be a warning. Oh, I know. I put it lower so the zoom stuff won't obscure it, but I'll move it and see if I can get it to scroll to what I want to show you. No, okay. I guess Firefox doesn't give you the same warnings. Never mind. Um, yeah, it's in Chrome, it gives you a warning that it couldn't open that file dialog, right? Because basically the idea is, sorry about all this. Hello. I want to put everything back the way it was. And this is good enough, roughly. Yeah. Put that down to, come on. where I want it to be. Okay, well, we'll make do. No, we can't make do. I can't see this stuff because of the Zoom stuff. Sorry. Screen mechanics. Okay. Okay, we'll move it a bit. Then I can get at the tab and it should come back. Yeah. So the thing is, right, the browser won't let you do this unless you initiated the UI operation, right? So what actually happens here is that, well, if we were to do the same scheme that we did, say, with the buttons or with or almost everything else, where we just send an event up and then send it down and ask it to do, and then all of these browsers would be trying to open a file dialog. Now, for starters, that's not what you want, because only one of these clients actually is going to upload its particular data, because it's highly unlikely that this data even exists on all the clients, right? It's much more likely that that you don't have that file at all, and certainly not at the same location, and certainly not with the exact same contents, and so forth, right? So you don't want to do everybody uploading them. You only want one person uploading them. And in any case, the browser won't let you open it except on the client that initiated it, that actually started the UI event. So we have to do something different here. And what we do is the client that initiated it, rather than sending immediately the event up, it starts opening the file, but it treats the file differently. So the data in the file, what usually happens is it feeds it to some closure that's supposed to decide what I wanted to do with the file once it's read. And instead, we do that. We feed it a closure that will take that file data, post it to the reflector, and then send an event up to everyone that these files are ready for you. You should look at them and do your thing with and when that event comes down, they'll actually process it. Uh, I may go through the code if we have the time to, because otherwise that may not have been terribly clear. What is important is that we actually can read files, right? So let's see, do them by name and find some interesting files to upload. Let's see, where are they? Yeah, these two should be good. So you notice they appeared here and they appeared here. So these are files. Now, it so happens that, yeah, because I can't demo it otherwise, both of these browsers are on my machine, but this would work the same if they were browsers on different machines. These files would reach these different clients, even though the original file didn't exist on that machine. Because what's happened is it's been copied into some Croquet API that stores stuff for you on the reflector, and then uh, basically each of these clients has access. Are we okay on the audio? Because something weird just happened on my end.
I can still hear you
Back.
fine.
It seemed to have glitched, but it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we can read multiple files, and that requires special attention. And there are other cases like this, right? So let's suppose that I'll create a document, and right. So here we are. Right. So now we've created a new document. And if we go here, just okay. Right. Now suppose I want to do drag and drop. Hopefully I have this still. Yeah, okay. Suppose I want to do drag and drop. So that also works, right? So I dragged it from one machine and it shows up in both of them, right? This is a similar problem because, again, the drag and drop operation only happens on one machine. If I asked all of these machines to, okay, set yourself up to drop this into the document, nothing's being dropped on all the other machines, Like the only place where a drag and drop actually is happening is on the initiating client. So again, it has to be set up in this way where, okay, we're going to uh, handle this by doing our drag and drop, taking that data, or we're basically going to tell everybody there's going to be a drag and drop, and there'll be data for you. Then we do the drag and drop, get that data, post it to the reflector, and then say, here, it's on the reflector. Here's an event for everyone. Then everyone responds to the event. Oh, let me get that data from the reflector and actually put it inside the document, right? So you have to do this. Now, all of this happens in the UI framework, right? The clients of this thing don't care, right? There's an API for doing drag, and it happens, right? It's just that the UI framework has to have a structure that handles drag and drop that will handle this so that not everybody has to go through some special rigmarole to make this happen. So this is kind of what I meant by external events. I can go into more detail, but I don't want to eat up too much of people's time. So back to our regular scheduled presentation. Uh, there are a bunch of other issues, one of which I alluded to, like I mentioned, that scrolling, for example, or zooming, scaling up, right? If I decide to make these smaller, only this guy gets smaller, right? Because you don't want some of these operations synchronized. There's also issues like, what if I want to have some place on the side where I can scribble to myself that isn't being synchronized? Right? One of the problems with this model is that everything is being synchronized, all your data, everything's happening on all the clients the same, so you don't have any private stuff, right? And so we could have subparts of the UI that aren't synchronizing, but you have to be very careful so that they don't change the data or anything, otherwise the all hell will break loose. There's sort of a research agenda to how to support that better. Then there's a question, as I said, all of this is not what the Croquet folks generally recommend you do, to put it mildly. Croquet is basically designed to make collaboration aware stuff, right? You know that it's collaborative, it's synchronizing, you're using Croquet, you're coding to Croquet's way of doing things. And this is all about making things that are collaboration oblivious. And there's a school of thought that says you shouldn't do that. You can't do that. If you don't know about the collaboration that's happening, it will not work. And there are various issues here that can come up. One issue is, let's take an IDE example, right? We're both working on a class, and you decide to add a method to the class, and I decide to delete the class. And we're doing this very close together in time. And so everything will happen consistently, but depending if we both happen to do this at sort of more or less the same millisecond, these events will happen in one of two orders. And when they reach the Croquet reflector, whichever reaches first will be first. And so there's two orderings. Either what will happen is we added this method to the class and then deleted it, which is probably not what at least some of us wanted, but at least it's coherent. Or worse, we remove the class and then try to add a method to it. And if the application is collaboration oblivious, it's an old IDE that never thought of this. This is a situation that could not happen. It was coded to, in order to add the method, you have to be looking at the class. It has to be there. So when you add the method, it doesn't check if the class exists or anything. And if the class doesn't exist when you're adding the method, something bad will happen. The application might crash, right? So the argument is, see, you can't make it oblivious. To which I'll say, this is about collaboration, not about people trying to undercut each other. And this is like the same, you could say we're both sitting in front of this keyboard and I seize it and punch you in the face and delete your class, right? You have to basically, this is intended for a number of people, and while Croquet can scale to quite large numbers, what I'm doing is intended for actual collaboration. There's only so many people who can do this, and they have to actually collaborate. They have to agree. They don't do things like that, right? They don't delete each other's classes. They talk to each other. Then the counter argument to that is, but what if it happens by accident? You sort of misclicked or something. And that's a fair point. And I have a solution in mind, but it's not there yet. But basically, if you tag these events with serial numbers, and you can basically have a sort of a global lock, if you will, that will check that events have not happened out of order. And so when that's working, I'll talk more about this scheme, but I think this is a solvable problem. But in the interests of honesty, I'm bringing up that there is that criticism. There's another criticism of collaboration obliviousness. What if I want an editor like Google Docs, which, shows multiple cursors for the different collaborators, right? This isn't going to happen if you don't know. And I'd argue it is going to happen because all of the work here is in the UI framework or the platform more generally. And so if I should make an editor as part of my UI framework that is that is collaboration aware. That doesn't mean that your application has to take advantage of it, right? If you don't know about it, then there's only going to be one person in the editor, and you'll never notice that it can actually show multiple cursors when there are multiple people. So there is a solution to that. Then there are questions about security, which is, again, a fair issue. Again, privacy and security, all your data, it's operating on all the clients, it's all exposed. That's partly we talked about in the localizing view thing. Yeah, there's an interesting issue how you do something where, for example, let's say you have some sort of thing where you can comment on each other's documents, and you want only you can write in your comments and only people with permissions can write. And how do you architect all that? There's work to be done there. It'll revolve around capabilities. Newspeak is an object capability system, but I try to talk about things when they're close to being real. So I'm not going to talk about that, especially because we're running out of time. Uh, so what else did I have to say? Oh yeah, the most important thing in my mind is, as I said, the whole goal of this historically has been to enable offline support, to do much of what the local first people do. And obviously, Croquet is essentially the opposite of that. So what are we going to do here? When you go offline with Croquet, you freeze, right? You literally can't do anything. So the plan is step one, don't freeze, essentially provide a local reflector. So if you go offline, we switch to a reflector that's part of your local system. And then you send your messages go to it. It sends you back. You can keep working offline and all is well. But then you get to the real problem, right? Which is the deep problem of local first, which is what happens when you now have this different version and you're trying to rejoin a Croquet session when all of Croquet was designed to only deal with things that are in the same state. And it can bring you forward to a state, but it can't deal with the fact that now there are merge conflicts, right? These things may have evolved in different ways that contradict each other. So there's actually a scheme here that I hope to implement in not too long, famous last words. Basically, the idea is you switch to the network version, you bring yourself up to the state of the network version, but all your changes, you save before that, you save your changes and provide them again to the reflector. And then you basically, the next event is switch to a view for essentially a diff view to let them be manually reconciled. So you'll do a merge like Git, and if there's no contradiction, you'll just say, yeah, we're doing that on all the clients because that'll happen after you've switched. And if there are contradictions, they'll show up in this view and we'll ask humans to reconcile them. And they're all reconciling in sync, right? They're actually, every decision they make is going to happen on all the clients. So that'll be really cool when that works. I hope that won't be very far off in the future. But that's the answer. That's the next big step now that this thing is. Okay, there's a bunch of small bugs that still have to be that luckily haven't shown themselves in this demo, but they could show up that still have to be fixed. But largely it's working, and soon we'll move to the next phase, I hope. So yeah, that is the whole story. And thanks for listening. And any further questions or comments are very welcome.
Um, Not directly related to the talk, Gilad, but I haven't kept up to date on Newspeak. How rich is the UI library at this point?
It's pretty poor. I mean, it's enough to do what I do. I mean, the whole point of Newspeak at this point, since the world has stupidly failed to use it for everything and pay me vast amounts of money for it, I still haven't figured out why that is. But basically, it's a hobby that my research and agenda and useful things for me. So right, the entire UI works in this. So if we look, right, we have links. We
Mhm.
have lists, we have drop-down menus, we have help, we have buttons that close and open things. Let's see, we can do something. There is one thing I wanted to show that's there are other stuff that we have. Let's find it. I think it's this guy. Right, actually, yeah, let's just run this guy. Okay, I'm gonna make this smaller so you can see both of them, right? So this is like a slider thing, right? Just in case you're wondering if this thing is capable of syncing very well, right? So there's a bunch, there are check boxes, there's radio buttons. Uh,
Mm.
I'm trying to think. There's not a whole lot. So things are missing, obvious things are missing. Tooltips have been on my list for a long time. Um, of course, there's all these layout primitives that you can build other more complicated things out of. Let's see what else is there. Let's look at Hopscotch. Hopscotch for HTML is here somewhere. So yeah. Oh no, this is showing me. Yeah, this is a bug. Hang on, we'll find it in the presentation. I believe we have the presentation. This is the class. Right, so this is the original Hopscotch class, and it has this much stuff. So it has a concept of history that for the whole that all applications share that you can use in a toolbar. It has things, yeah, it can import video and audio players because again, especially for Croquet, you need to keep those in sync somehow. Uh, yeah, uh, things that show you time, sliders we've just seen. Yeah, that's kind of and of course it allows you to create your own sort of model view controller-ish things. But
Mm.
that's largely it. And so I can do a lot of stuff, but I'm sure that there's fancy stuff that is missing.
Mm.
And
The original Croquet had a virtual 3D environment.
yeah.
Is that emulated at all, or are you primarily just using the collaboration?
Croquet, this Croquet also, the JavaScript Croquet also provide has a 3D environment. I'm not using that. Uh, I don't particularly so you can, of course, you can use JavaScript 3D things, for example, because you can call anything on the web and run it. But I don't
Yeah.
have any 3D environments, and I'm not using the Croquet stuff. And in fact, when I said that Croquet was over innovating, that's one of the things I meant because I
Mm.
could have given not quite this demo in the web browser, but I could have given a sort of similar demo in the Newspeak on Smalltalk system that we had way back in 2009 if I had realized fully what Croquet was about. But Croquet, because there was so much 3D stuff and all that, I didn't realize that I could just use the sync engine without being tied to all that virtual reality stuff, right?
Yeah.
And that gets lost in the noise. So I'm only interested in the sync. And
Mm.
happily, Croquet is now it's been open sourced. We're using the commercial company's system because it works well and they have reflectors everywhere and all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
But you don't have to, and I would be hesitant to rely on a small startups stuff
Mm.
in general because bad things happen to small startups historically, and you're never sure. So it's great that it's open source and that's an option. And so
Yeah.
you can, oh, there's one more. We can try and do something crazy and try and share from the phone and show if that will work. Um, right, let's see if I can do that. Let's see what version on it. Oh, yeah, so this is a version that's actually on the way. I've been using localhost for both social and technical reasons, right? I don't actually want you guys messing with my presentation, but if I give you a URL you can access, then somebody's going to be clever and decide to play with it. But let's see if it'll work now. Uh, what's best? Let's bring Safari. Where's Safari? Safari? What happened to Safari? I guess I must have closed it. Let's let's see if it'll come up. Yeah, okay. What version are we on? Hang on a second. So this is a different URL. This one's on the web, so I could put this in the chat. Okay, let's go to a newer one just to be on the safe side. I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to I'm going to take this one and put it into, you see the iPhone, whatever thing, right?
Yeah.
So now, hopefully if I got that right. What's it doing?
It's doing the snapshot thing, isn't it? The restore.
Yeah, I don't know if you're, okay, cancel that. Hang on, hello. That is not working right? I want to see something here. Are we on the same version? Oh, it's a different URL. That's not the one I wanted. Hello. So the paste did not succeed. Okay, let's do that again. Hello, delete. Okay, it tells me it's pasting and then it's sort of hanging here. Okay, now it's pasted it. Okay, now we have this. So yeah, okay. So now we have the slide on the phone.
Hmm.
And oops, I don't want to hide that. Let's, yep. See, hopefully everyone can see that,
Yeah.
right? Phone is, so the phone is synced to the presentation as well. Now, I could put this URL in the chat and you all can mess with it and we could see if how bad things get. So Croquet is very good at scaling, but I'm testing it, I'm stress testing it in a different way because I'm having these fine-grained UI events and it works when a small number of people click on it, but it's basically guaranteed to work because it's limited by how fast people can type. But if there's a lot of people, I'm not sure what would happen. But if anyone wants to take this URL, where's the chat here? I'm going to put it in the chat. And you're welcome to give it a shot and see, first of all, will it actually, will the snapshot thing work and catch up for you properly, which is an open question. And then if it does, uh, then will that actually work across the ocean and everything the way it's supposed to?
Hmm.
Okay, yes, somebody just, yeah, whoever did, marvelous. Yeah, it works.
Yeah,
I'm always thrilled that it really works because I haven't had the opportunity to test it very much with, I've tested with other people. You can do ID collaboration this well, but only in California. I haven't really tried to do it when it's having to work this across the world and stuff. But yeah, it apparently is, but it kind of works, though it does jitter a bit.
Hmm. What
Okay,
what
so
what happens if we embed elements in a Newspeak page? I'm assuming because it's HTML5 based that you could embed things like an SVG image or
You
model?
could. Okay, somebody's made it crash. I'm not sure what happened there, but at least they're all showing the debugger. But so essentially, what happens is right. Let's go back to. Hang on. If yeah, this is why I didn't put out the public URL for the talk because now I don't know where we are. But if you'll hold on a minute, we'll go to. Oh, actually, this was the different. This was the different. This was my localhost thing. So I'll show you it on my localhost thing, which has the advantage that you can't mess with it. Uh,
Did you really?
so hang on. We had this, right? Remember this document, right? So we basically did a local drag and drop of an image, and it's all been, it's all web-based, right? This thing is HTML. If you care to see, right? So the Ampleforth document system is a two-view thing where you can basically edit either the HTML or not. So if I go and find the right place where it says this is a UK STUG, okay, we don't have enough screen real estate. Let's move that, right? So these two keep in sync, right? That's a different sync than the sync we're talking about with the browser, which somewhere under all these windows is Firefox, which hopefully is still keeping track. Which and hopefully it'll catch up. Yeah, there we are. Right. So yeah, you can put. So there is a there the UI framework supports explicit Newspeak widgets that encapsulate random pieces of HTML.
Mm.
So that you can put other stuff in them. So yeah, that should be fine.
Mm.
You were going to show us a little bit of now. What was it? Was it the bit that said? Oh, the yeah. When you were doing the drag and drop the file piece, how you figured?
The code, how that works?
Yeah.
Sure. If you're haven't suffered enough, I can add to your troubles. Yeah, 1 second. So let's find that. Um,
Presumably, these are the kinds of things that you discover as you start using it, and you're like, oh yeah, of course, I need to think about that. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I did do a bit of thinking before I went to the trouble of overriding all the UI elements, right? But initially, the first thing I did was, yeah, I just overdid button because that's the easiest thing, and said, oh, now the counter works because the counter just needs buttons. Oh, did I show you the counter? I didn't show you the counter. Or did I? I can't remember anymore.
No, you did. I don't think we saw
Yeah,
the app.
hang on a second. So there's a couple of cool things. We'll find, hello, counter UI, right? Counter app. So I can deploy this as a Newspeak object from here. And I'll save it. Okay, I already did this before, so it's going to save it again, but it'll be there. And I suspect that you all may find in your downloads folder a copy of this. But what's
Was this the oh, this is the local one, so we won't. So yeah.
No, that should actually, I wonder, because saving, like if I save, let's say I go to some random class like this one and I save it. It happens, at least on my machine, it happens on multiple clients. So see if anything happened to your, in your downloads folder. Oh, and it won't happen because this is on localhost,
Yeah, that's
sorry.
the local
If I
one.
do
Yeah.
it in the other one, okay, we can do it in the other one. Where are you, Safari? Let's try and do something interesting. Hang on, thread subject. Okay, terminate. Yeah, I'll get rid of the help. Yeah, give me a second. Let's go to home and to the source. And yeah, okay, we can take, hang on. People have messed all kinds of places. This is cool. But let's take collections and let's save that. So I think you should have a collections.ns in your downloads folder. Unless, okay, I don't know what people are doing here, but
I'm no longer connected.
okay, that's unfortunate. But is that the case with everybody?
Also still looking at the debugger. It didn't close when you closed it.
Okay, it may be. So what may have happened, if any, the one problem with this thing is what many problems with this thing. One problem is that the minute there's a bug and the snapshots diverge, right? Then now you don't have the same state on all of these guys. And then all hell breaks loose. It doesn't work. Either it hangs or your clicks now have different fragment numbers, which identify them as different widgets. And so you click on a button and it thinks it's another button and opens something else and everything falls to pieces, right? So it has to be absolutely perfect or it's terrible. That's one of the properties here. But if things work well, it's this is obviously synchronizing with somebody because somebody is still messing with this thing and things are changing under my feet. So I assume that somebody still has their thing working, and they very likely have a copy of collections.ns there because saving does work. But what I wanted to show you, which at least you can see it on my screen if your version is broken is I need to, again, load the file here. Okay, this is it. I'm going to go to the localhost version. Sorry, guys. I think this has just gotten a bit too ambitious for it. But on the localhost version, I do want to have the Firefox, and I want to go to Counter App, and I want to be able to see both of them. And I want to basically load. Okay, I actually don't need counter app. What I need now is to load the app. Date monitor added. Do we have a counter? No, we want to go to downloads. Counter app. One of these is a counter app. Yeah, counter app. This will do. So this is the binary form of the counter app, right? It's all of 4 kilobytes. It's just a counter, right? That's the thing we serialized the counter application when I did that download that caused everything to go crazy. So if I open that, what should happen is we get a counter, right? We've loaded the application into our system. And the counter, oops, what we need is a little more real estate, right? We want to show both of these, right? The counter is working across everyone, right? Across both of these and would work in general, right? So that's again is an app that synchronizes anyway, right? It's just an app that was designed. Counter was the first example of this framework years ago. Has no idea of collaboration, but it synchronizes. That is something I wanted to show. And there was a question about the files. So the files, oh yeah, we had to find where the files were. They were in the document in here. So there is this guy, file chooser fragment. So indeed, as Tim suggested, this is something you discover when you say, well, how am I going to handle that? You realize that you can't just do the normal calls to whatever JavaScript file UIs because this needs to go to something that'll talk to Croquet. So I introduced this file chooser fragment that didn't exist, right? Because before said, yeah, call the JavaScript API and open a file. But now I actually need some intermediary that handles these calls so that there'll be a place to do this traffic with Croquet. And there are, yeah, this is the version in the base hopscotch, and it has a choose file list method, which takes a closure and basically it will open up this native JavaScript thing, well, the web API that will open up the native Mac thing that'll let you load files. and it'll get those files and then pass it to the closure, and the closure can do what it wants with the files, right? So that's what we had before we had the collaboration. Now, if let's find all the implementers of choose file list and get this right. So it'll be convenient to have all of these guys next to each other. So this is the choose file list in the original, and this is the choose file list in the overriding version. And so, whereas in button, if you remember, we said, okay, it simply publishes an event, and later we'll deal with it. This one still goes and actually calls the super choose right here, super choose file list. It's doing the regular behavior of choosing a file list, but it's giving it a different closure. It isn't giving it the closure that came in as a parameter. It's giving it a closure here, wherever it ends. And it's all a rigmarole of, because these APIs are asynchronous and all whatever, but the net effect is it is getting the files, getting their contents, because that's a problem, because when you initially read the files, you still don't quite have their contents because it's an asynchronous API. Putting those back on the reflector somewhere, we can kind of start working through this. And then when it's on the reflector, it's publishing the event. So the event that it tells everyone everything's ready, we have this stuff, is here. So let's try and remember what it's doing. So it calls a helper method to extract file data. And when that file data is ready, it's going to do stuff with it. So what does it do? It allocates an array of descriptors with metadata for the files, and it goes through all the files, and where are the promises here? PS, where did they come from? Hang on, I have to remember what this does, right? Okay, so, right, so we're creating, yeah, we're trying to get, all right, this is an array that we're going to store promises in. This is an array that we're going to store metadata in, because metadata you can get, I think, synchronously. Then you're going through all these files or handles for files that JavaScript gave you. And it's filling in the promises with accesses, right. So it's basically telling this to store the data. And right, so this is the root view. This is an element that represents the Croquet's view, a JavaScript object, and it has a store data API, and we tell it to store this stuff. So this is storing the data on the reflector. And because this is an asynchronous API, these are promises is what we get back, and that's what's get put in this promise array. And we also collect all the descriptors for the files, and then we're going to wait for all these promises to be ready, right? This is the JavaScript promise API. When all the promises are ready, then we're going to get the actual data. And at that point, we're going to essentially publish the event, right? And so I don't know if that's terribly clear, but
I can get the gist of it. Yeah.
yeah. And the point is, right, it's different from what you usually do. Usually you would have said, okay, instead of all this, I'm going to say, there's been a choose file list event, broadcast it, and ask everybody to choose a file list. But we don't want everybody to choose a file list for all the reasons we've discussed. And so instead we're doing all this and only having, so the only client that chooses a file list is the local one where the initial click that drove this happened. And all the rest are, what they're doing is not choosing a file list, but reading files from the reflector after this guy has posted it.
Yeah.
And there's a different rigmarole for the drag and drop. There's a thing called a media creator fragment, because again, the original version just used drag and drop, but that did nothing, as I discovered when I tried it, right? And so you had to create so what it does is it creates a special drag and drop UI element that it puts there. And then that UI element does a drag and drop sends the event to everybody else, and says, okay, now UI elements of this media creator form, the drag and drop data is here. Please replace yourself with that data. Right. So this is a fairly common pattern that there's similar stuff with local storage. There's a bunch of stuff like that. So there's interesting issues, but and in that sense, it's good. It's a general solution for this problem.
I have a possible suggestion, and it has to do with events being tagged with a time, if you will, but to tag them with another scale, which you might call salience, which goes from local ephemeral to deep model, always snapshot this state. And it could be granular. And so if you do like a separation and a rejoin and do a diff, you don't have to go through all of the keystrokes to create a file. You could get the data for the top file, because that's where you know, you're impacting the deeper state, if you will, rather than the ephemera, which you can reproduce in the UI, but the ephemera of in the UI, which are creating that, you can you know, go to say, I only want to see things that are that have a salience greater than a certain amount. And maybe that'll spark an idea in your head about how to do that.
Okay, I have not thought about that, and I'm still not sure if I know where or how to what degree I want that, because again, all the real data is in the Newspeak heap, right? So at some point I'd have to arrange to pass in that salient data specially, right? So I'm not sure I've fully grokked that or what I want to do. I mean, so just the broader
Well-
context, right? So there's a whole school of thought, right, that does this stuff entirely with CRDTs, right? There's a much larger movement all around the idea of CRDTs, and their argument is with CRDTs we do all the sync, even if it's offline, it always converges, and we can even do that for the real-time stuff. What experience that I've seen and talked to people is that for the real-time stuff, it gets challenging and doesn't always hold up. And CRDTs still have problems that their proponents are apt to de-emphasize, shall we say, right? Because the CRDTs, they converge. They always converge. It's beautiful. You've defined the problem of divergence away. They're going to converge. The only problem is converge to what? Right? Does it converge to what you wanted? And the answer is not always. And that's a charitable interpretation, often not. And certainly you still have to use a framework and call and put in your calls at certain places and what have you. And so, but the beauty of their argument is assuming to the extent that it works, that one thing carries everything. I'm saying I'm going to have to do something different when I have to do the local first stuff. So there's a whole different school of thought that says just use CRDTs all the way, which I'm skeptical of. But yeah, there's different ways to presumably to skin this cat. But I haven't seen one that the CRDT works very well as far as it works, but it can't really do quite the kind of things I'm doing. And basically the key thing is I don't want the programmer to ever have to worry about any of this again. Right? It's completely, it's going to be like GC. That's why I could take, I'm Newspeak is at this point a hobby project, right? It is mostly just one old guy and spending part of his time on it, right? And so the fact that I can have a collaborative IDE is not something that I could have afforded to build, right? I have spent years getting this, with other people's contribution, getting this IDE to where it is. And making it collaborative or redoing it to be collaborative is not an option. The fact that just works because I did this project is a benefit, right? So the orthogonal synchronization really pays for me, right? So I don't know, how I'd tamper with it. It's an idea. I'll think about it, but I don't know that I necessarily want that level of options and complexity. I like the fact that it's all uniform. There is the valid criticism. Okay, well, now what if you have this chat room that's open for years, right? Because now and maybe the answer for that, one answer, now that it's open source, one thing is I could say, yeah, let's add an image to the Newspeak system. and let's save the image, but we'll set it up that it only snapshots once an hour, right? Or something. So it isn't disruptive or whatever. At that point, the chat room problem is not a big problem. And yeah, and we can have it sync up that way, and then we don't have this issue with the event history. For at least we don't have it for enough time that it's a problem. So there's different ways. We'll see. We'll see what happens, right? At the rate I'm going, it'll be another year or two before you hear from me again, right? So
Great. Anyway, thank you.
thank you. Any other questions, comments, whatever, or have you had enough?
There's
I
never.
know it's late in England.
For the file lock, go ahead.
Go on. Go ahead.
This question for the file lock, have you ever thought about using just having one person own, let's say like in the case of changing this code for a class that someone else depends on, so there's only one owner who can own it?
So this is similar to I mentioned this idea, for example, an application, right? So I have a whole live document system, and one of the things you'd like to add to it is, okay, people can comment, right? Like they do in Google Docs. And then these things have restrictions, like you write comments, no one else can type in your comments, right? No one else can pretend that they're commenting as you. And so there's a permissions issue of some sort. How you get that in is, especially in a live system, which basically lets you program it, right? The Newspeak in general deals with a problem of security that Smalltalk simply doesn't care about, which is that, I like to say, right, Alan said that the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And they did not invent viruses and malware at Xerox PARC, and so they didn't deal with it. And so you have to deal with it. And Newspeak, because it is an object capability system, has a notion of security. It has a notion of the fact that not everyone can get at things and call things, and you can control who has reflective access and so forth. And so, in principle, that system could be applied so that we're setting up say mirrors that say you can only view this class. You don't actually have permission. The problem here is you're working in the same environment and supposedly it's in the same state. So I have to have a notion of user within the environment so that everybody has a state, but the state includes this is some user who has distinct permissions and distinct capability objects and things like that. So it's a major agenda to actually deal with this, and I should in the fullness of time. It's just that thankfully Newspeak is not popular enough to be a target for hacking, and it's not a big problem. But the approach to this would be the same. It would be capabilities, and what we do have is we'd have to have a notion in the Croquet system, a notion of user that's distinct within a given instance.
So does that imply that you've got all the data, you just can't access some of the data that you've got? Is that?
So it can imply whatever you want, depending what the capabilities are, but you can't change it, for example. Now,
You've all got the same data.
right, you've all got the same data, but maybe, as far as Croquet is concerned, right, you're running the same instance with all the same data in it, but it is rigged somehow that some of you can't get at the data or can't change the data.
I was going to ask about persistence, but it suddenly dawned on me that the persistence thing you're thinking about it differently because you've all got copies of the same data, and then like you said, you just don't have the
The tricky
capability.
thing is that some of the state right. So this again refers that there's Croquet in its pure form says everything is in lockstep. They're all the exact same thing. There's places where you clearly have to deviate from that. For example, okay, I have to know who is the initiator of this particular click so that I open the file dialog and nobody else, or I do the drag and drop, right? This notion has to be expanded so that I can keep track of the fact that despite the fact that supposedly we're all in lockstep, I know who the owner of this particular client is. right? So there's got to be pieces of state that are somehow separate, and that's very tricky, right? So that they're separate and yet they do not affect the shared execution in a problematic way. And yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure how that'll fly, but that's part of that whole security and localization agenda that I mentioned. So there's plenty of open questions. And this is one of the things that until you have a system that works that does this, you don't know that it's really going to work.
Because I think prior to fully understanding what you were saying, I was thinking there could be other members of the network that maybe don't have a UI and are just storing things. In my mind, I was thinking, oh, well, maybe there's something that stores this stuff and shares it with everyone else. But I guess that doesn't really make sense because we've all got the same thing. But
Well, in some sense, you could leverage the reflector for that, but that's kind of an abuse of it.
yeah, I suppose, yeah, if you wanted a time machine or something that stored history in some interesting way, you could have something that did that and had that information. But yeah, it doesn't.
Yeah, because you do have a whole series of events. You can replay and go back and things. In principle, you could do that.
Another bomb. Blockchain your snapshots.
Ooh, I have to say that I haven't
Sorry.
even thought what that means, but I have an allergic reaction that's
If you
already
wanted to go back, to always be able to start from something and go forward, and you have nasty actors in with the good actors, and at some point you want to go back to that. You have to have some way of getting to a stable point, starting from there, and then
yeah,
playing forward.
I can see that. So
It was
there
a
are a
little
lot of
tongue in cheek.
directions. Yeah. Again, given the thousands of contributors that helped me with this, I'm sure we'll get to this soon. But this naturally follows my own interests because otherwise, why do it? And I can't say that, there's lots of things I'll do before I get to blockchain, but it's probably a valid approach to do that, and might be interesting. My after I get this done, or in parallel, the other big thing is integrating AI into the Newspeak environment, which is another whole story. But blockchain, yeah, you're welcome to contribute, I guess.
The Wikipedia editors just said that they're not using summaries and AI help because they tried that, and what they found is that the AI recommended things that were strictly against their policies and suggested adding references that the AI had made up and inserted.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
that sort
So
of thing.
I'm quite familiar
We're
with.
not near anything that is coherent for AI at this point.
I'm quite familiar with the state of where the AI tools are, and there's interesting things you can do in this environment that are different from the IDE integrations that the mainstream does, as usual. And yes, of course, it's not perfect, but it's also can be very useful. And yeah, the editors of Wikipedia are welcome to do what they will. Uh, I uh, I think that if it certainly hallucinates, but I'd also say that if it goes against Wikipedia policy, the AI has an even chance of being right. But that's okay. I think that there's very interesting things that can be done there. The other thing to remember is that AI is not a static thing, it is a moving target. And at the rate that I'm progressing, by the time I'm done, it will work. Because I've been working on this for so many years. So I'm an AI. I don't know if you want to call it an optimist, but I do believe this will, the criticisms are referring to a state that is constantly changing and they'll be obsolete before long, a lot of them. So that's a whole different talk and a whole different discussion. But anyway, that's just the next thing I'm going to do. And yeah, in 2 years, if I'm back to talk to you guys, maybe it'll be about the AI, or maybe it'll be about finishing this. We'll see.
How often do you get to work on it? Is it, a couple hours a week or?
It's probably more than that. It depends. Some weeks, so I hadn't done much work in August at all because I was on holiday. Um, and then I came back and said, "Oh, I have this talk in a week, and it still isn't working." So the past week I did a fair amount because there were a number of bugs that I've fixed, so that this demo actually more or less worked as intended. But it varies a lot. But I'm slow. Okay, it takes
Yeah,
a
slow
long
and
time.
steady. It's nice. It's yeah, and I guess how complicated is it under the hood? I mean, you showed us some of the stuff. It doesn't look too. I mean, how big is the actual system to sort of?
It's not big and it's not complicated. If I'm not smart enough to do complicated, right? So it's been a while since I actually tried to count, but there's probably, I don't know, 60, 70,000 lines of Newspeak code in the world, most of which are part of the IDE.
Yeah.
There's a VM, which I try not to touch, which I actually want to replace, but only when I have something better to replace it with, which is some ways out. Um, and so the VM is a C++ VM, but a relatively simple one. And yeah, so it's not complicated. It's not huge. As I said, the problem is that except for me, not many people do much with it anymore.
I guess originally you used the Smalltalk VM, didn't you? Because I remember you
Yeah,
first
yeah.
about
So
bootstrapping in
we
Smalltalk.
started out with a Squeak VM. The Squeak VM actually was modified. There was a thing called NSVM, which was a modified Squeak because there are different bytecodes. There are enough different things that certain performance things needed bytecodes. So the Newspeak, there was a Newspeak VM that was a version of the Squeak stuff. And eventually, yeah, we went to the web for all kinds of reasons. And on the web, there is a different VM that's just a pure Newspeak implementation, and it in C++. It doesn't support Smalltalk like the original version supported both Newspeak and Smalltalk, and you had this image that was where you could run Smalltalk code. And one of the problems with that is it became difficult to bootstrap, right? Because we were so tied to Squeak in so many ways. We were using Squeak strings and inheriting from Squeak object and Squeak, there's all this stuff that you don't do so that it can interoperate. So this is a pure Newspeak system, and it has nothing to do with the old one in that sense.
And the WASM stuff, I guess you introduced in the last couple of years, or I don't know, maybe years ago.
It's almost, yeah. So I guess since 2020 or so, kind of it started to work. The WASM is, yeah, it's scripting from the C++. And that's when we went with the web. So we did have an earlier web version, which was JavaScript, so transpiled to JavaScript.
Right.
The problem with that is we couldn't get the right semantics, right? Because JavaScript could not do all the stuff in a plausible way. In the meantime, JavaScript, some corners have changed crucially, and I am thinking of going back and doing a pure JavaScript implementation, which would have pros and cons again, but it would have the advantage that it would be probably faster and easier to understand for someone who hates C++ like me. And yeah, we'll see if that happens.
So were you thinking like JavaScript VM or like transcribe?
No, JavaScript VM, I could, if I wanted that, I could take Squeak.js and combine it with a Newspeak on Squeak and probably get something to work that way. No, it's a JavaScript. It translates into JavaScript.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
That's what the existing system did. It's basically an extension of that, cleaning up a few things and taking advantage of new things so that it will actually implement the full system, which is not a trivial task, but it now seems doable.
Right. Okay, thanks.
So what's next on your list in terms of?
So like I said, so one thing is finishing this, in the sense there's two steps to finishing this. Finishing the Croquet stuff is a small matter of nailing down a few more buglets around mainly the replay, which occasionally fails. And there may be a couple of other corners, but it's not a big deal. The bigger thing is actually doing the local first stuff, actually doing what I described in the last slide of saying, okay, we're going to set it up so that there's some sort of diffing mechanism. There's a way of persisting things and comparing them. And that's a fair amount of work.
Yeah.
That's one dimension we could go on. The other is the AI integration, which Ken is very skeptical of, as many people are, I'm well aware of, but I think it's really interesting what you can do there. Basically, the whole question of teaching the AI Newspeak, I've done some experiments. It's quite interesting. And then then there's the whole issue of of a new engine, so that we overcome the limitations of this one. Basically a JavaScript engine, and that there's a whole bunch of problems there because JavaScript makes things hard in all kinds of ways. And now it has real integers, for example, proper integers, which it didn't used to have. That's one example, not the most important problem, but one. It has proper weak arrays, which it didn't have. That's actually critical because then you can implement an object table. And when you have an object table, you can do all objects and you can do become and you can do all the stuff that actually needs to happen, which was very partly difficult and partly impractical to impossible to do in the old JavaScript version, which is why we went to the WASM version. And yeah, and a bunch of other things, because JavaScript, stifling the misbehaviors of JavaScript is also a problem. The JavaScript semantics crawl up on you from below like zombies that grab you and drag you down. If you're trying to be efficient and utilize some of the native JavaScript types, and then you find that silently behind the scenes, their strings are turning into numbers and vice versa, and things that shouldn't have worked. Yeah, so there's lots of stuff to make that solid. So those are the three major areas. I hope to live long enough to do all of them, but who knows? It's don't hold your breath unless you want to contribute, of course. But I've seen precious little of that. Milan is an exception, but again, the contributions have usually been around the edges of, making it a PWA, various web and build stuff, but very few people actually contribute to the Newspeak code base itself, to the core. And
Which is a shame because the language is beautiful. Actually, it is very nice.
well, thank you. It so happens it'll surprise you, but I agree with you. But obviously, this hasn't caused many people to want to do anything and contribute with it. And the more I work on it, the less likely it is because, of course, I innovate, I change things, whatever. It becomes more flaky and less solid over time. It's sort of because there's too many new things that aren't necessarily productized because I don't have the time, resources, and temperament to do all that.
Has someone made a PWA that has a reflector in it?
There isn't a version with a reflector. There's a PWA for the regular non-collaborative Newspeak. It wouldn't be too hard to do a PWA for this, but the reflector is really out there is a JavaScript file. But yeah, that would be part of it. But there's the Croquet infrastructure. The reflector itself is out. A local reflector, like I suggested, is one step in the path to making this local first. That would also be presumably fine. But making a PWA for what I just showed you is probably a very simple thing, right? It's very similar to the existing PWA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's now a PWA is even less important because this one still needs to be connected, right? The regular Newspeak, if you go to the Newspeak website and bring up that page, and once you load it, you can disconnect from the internet and it'll all because it doesn't talk back to a server, right? Not at all, right? This talks to a reflector, right? But all the actual work is happening in your local web browser. So a PWA for the Croquet thing makes a bit less sense in the sense that there's no motivation to run it offline until we fix all these issues, right?
Mhm.
Whereas for regular Newspeak, yeah, you can run it offline. You can you can disconnect it and run it in your web browser because it never goes back to the server after it's been loaded.
Mhm. And the number of subscribers in the reflector is okay. It's just quite happy with that, because I guess you end up with lots doing it this way, but maybe it's not a problem. Maybe that's the break.
It's not been a problem at all. Um, and it's slightly occasionally across versions of Croquet I've seen when I've seen differences, like, but it's gotten occasionally worse and better as they tweak their code base. But largely, as you can see, it's mostly seems to work just fine. Croquet for other use cases, they've had hundreds of or maybe more of users simultaneously. Now, this is designed for a handful of users, but all these users are giving more events, right? But it's still bounded, right? It's bounded by how fast people can type and a small number of people. Moreover, these people are collaborating, so they're usually not typing much at the same time. So I don't think it's an issue at all because again, it's more like as if you were all sitting in front of this machine and you got to use the keyboard like you're sharing a keyboard is kind of a good metaphor for this because that's the mode. You're collaborating, but you're not necessarily doing a lot simultaneously. In some cases you can, but you probably won't do a lot of that, right? You can theoretically like both be writing different methods at the same time or something, but only in the same view because otherwise it'll go back and forth and drive you nuts.
And,
So
and
yeah,
there was something about reflectors could like pass over to other reflectors or something, wasn't there? It's just like, you just add more reflectors. I'm not sure how you find them.
So now they have this whole theory about how the startup is going to actually make money, which involves multiple. Yeah, there's some story there that I'm not sure want to try and describe because I'm not sure I fully understand it. But yeah, but that's the infrastructure. Now, because it is open source, in principle, should anything bad happen to that startup or should they start charging me money or whatever, right? Because they're very nice. The developer program lets me do all this stuff and have never had a quota issue or anything. Um, then there is open source. So you can literally set up your own Croquet on a server somewhere. And of course, then you have the problem that, okay, I have a server somewhere and how well does it respond when you're in England and I'm here, right? They have a network and things, but it depends. Basically, then you're paying money to Google or someone to host this server and depending how much money you pay, they'll make it work. But at least there is that out of using open source. And the other advantage of the open source is, yes, we can experiment with the snapshotting, right? If we want to go to an image model, we can say snapshot every hour or every 10 minutes, or even every minute is probably fine, but every 5 seconds is probably a bit much, right? So being able to control that, or actually, probably I could turn it off and it would work, right? If it didn't snapshot at all, it would probably work as well, because then they'd replay the events for me. But I've already gone to the trouble of setting up the replay.
Actually, Gilad, I have a question. What are the events that go to the reflector? Pretty much every keystroke, every mouse move or mouse click?
Not every mouse move. You could argue that you want that if you wanted to have multiple cursors for the whole thing and see where. So one thing is, okay, because if you're not sharing a screen, if you're literally collaborating right through this, right? If this worked really well, I would tell you, you know what? On Zoom, you'll just have a picture of me, and now everybody hears this URL, and I'm going to do the slides, and you can all look at the slides in using the Newspeak collaboration.
Mm.
And I didn't do that for multiple reasons. You saw how well that worked when we did do that. Technically, I'm not sure how solid that is. B, socially, the bigger problem is getting a group of I don't know, 20 people so that nobody decides to do something at the same time. Because I started to see that this thing is moving in all kinds of ways that I don't know what someone is doing in some corner, right?
Right.
And it's always going to say, well, what happens if I do this? And so you can't really run a presentation that way.
We are
But you can,
also worldwide distributed, which makes the delay probably not so nice.
well, they're very good at that. so we tried that and it wasn't, yeah, the typing Kiso did have a bit of jankiness to it. It's true, but they have multiple reflectors and whatever. They're surprisingly good at that. So obviously if you're both trying to type really fast in the same thing, maybe that's doesn't work ideally, but look, which in principle it should work as well as Google Docs, if you engineer it well enough.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's a problem. But the events are, yeah. So the events are at the level of here, hopscotch for croquet. So we have events. So one of them is like a button click or a link click, or so the most intense one that I show you, right, was the one where we had the where is it? The little box hopscotch. This let's try it again. I don't know. I should have an instance of it. Hopscotch gesture. Don't see it, but let's just go to this guy and not deploy it. I'll run it. Run it. Sorry. Let's do this. Right. So this guy is probably the most intense in terms of events, right? So that is every every movement of
Every mouse move. Yeah, right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. So in principle, we could do like collaborative whiteboard, or we can draw.
Yeah, people, I think they've done that in Croquet, and now it's running through Newspeak, which might slow it down a bit. But yeah, you can do whiteboard. You should be able to do yeah, it should be able to do like ink and stuff and writing on a canvas. I haven't done that, but I think it's capable of doing that rather well.
Right. Thanks.
Okay, have I exhausted everyone?
I've got a question.
Sure.
Has anyone made any games for Newspeak?
Not that I know of. Not it's I can't say that it was intended for that, but yeah, you in principle. So there's another thing you can do, which is counter to this talk, which I don't encourage because my whole point in doing Newspeak for the web is that I never really want to see JavaScript again. But you could call the hopscotch framework calls the DOM and does this stuff. You can program to the DOM directly, or you could load in React and call it directly for that. But you can use any JavaScript UI framework you want. You can do JavaScript programming in Newspeak. I'm not sure I see a huge point to that, but it can be done. But you could also try and use these things, but you'll probably hit that the widget set isn't, you'd have to do a lot of work. Probably you'd find that you want to add widgets or things or all kinds of interesting things. And again, there's no 3D library, except again, you'd have to call JavaScript libraries. This does run, because it runs in a browser. I've run it in what is called a Quest in a Meta glass set. You can run Newspeak there too. And that would be a fun thing to pursue for someone who's interested in that sort of thing, to kind of try and use the various web VR kind of APIs and create stuff there. There's all kinds of stuff you can do. Being in the web browser is both a blessing and a curse, right? It gives you enormous advantages, and it's excruciatingly painful to deal with this thing. The bugs that I had this past week that I had to fix all had to do with the classic DOM things of some click handler happening more times than you thought it should, all that. It's, the DOM is in principle a very well-conceived thing, very small talking, not surprising, because Alan Wirfs-Brock had to do with that. But the whole sea of details and legacy and stuff there makes it so hard to work with. So yeah, it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, I think trying to do complicated graphics or whatever would be fighting what's cool about this. There is a two-dimensional, just 2D, basically 2D discs game that's multiplayer called agar.io that got very popular a while ago. I'll put it in the chat. And I wonder how hard it would be to make something like that with Newspeak.
That's an
Basically, you
interesting thing. So you know the Croquet people have done stuff like that in
okay, yeah.
it's JavaScript, but they have interactive game demos using Croquet that do this. Once you do Newspeak, the only thing is you are adding some overhead because Newspeak's slow, right?
Mhm.
That's one of the reasons I want to go back to JavaScript because the JavaScript is way faster than the WASM interpreter. It won't be as fast once it has all the right semantics because that'll slow it down, but it'll still be faster, a lot faster, multiple times.
Gotcha.
I have a question. Have you maybe considered instead of overriding your UI widgets framework, basically hacking every single widget, instead of doing that, intercepting events on earlier, like basically just logging all the keystrokes and mouse clicks and sending them to the Croquet and leaving the UI framework untouched?
Okay. No, I have not considered that because, well, I just haven't considered it. I'm not sure how, again, that puts even more demands, right, on Croquet. So right, so basically you're saying you set up the DOM to have handlers for every actual low-level event
Yep.
in the DOM, and then you don't have to do anything. That would be interesting. It might work. I'm a little worried that some of this might be too demanding, but maybe I'm wrong, right? Maybe it's fine. So because now literally, yes, you're tracking every movement of the mouse and the keystrokes are probably fine, but every mouse movement is basically all the time.
Yeah, and you need all your clients to be pixel precise, but yeah, that's possibly
Yeah,
okay.
well, yeah. So the other, so there's the size. What happens when there are different sizes, and yeah, I'm not sure how that works out, right? Because this, as you saw, it actually works on a phone. It synchronizes on the phone. So there are issues there that frankly, that I have to admit, I didn't even think about this idea.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Gilad, wouldn't maybe the Croquet people sort of know about something like this, like adding handlers to
So the Croquet people generally,
Yeah.
I don't know if Yoshiki is still on, was on the call in the end. He said he'd come, but
He was there.
No, yeah,
so
I'm here. I'm here.
okay,
actually.
so I will try not to misrepresent, but Yoshiki can correct me, right? Or he can answer
I
your
have been
question.
having a lot of fun hearing your answers.
Right. So one of the things, so the Croquet framework, the JavaScript Croquet thing is designed. The events that they're usually passing are semantic level events, right? Your model is your application and what's actually important about it, not its UI. And there are events that correspond to that. So they're actually much more higher level typically.
Yes. So yeah, like sending 60 events per second from a client and like people in the session, that's like just fine. But then as Gilad is saying, like coordinate of the click is different from different clients. And if you do that, like mouse down, many applications assume, so this was also Gilad's point, but sometimes your application is written in a way that it expects that mouse down is followed by mouse up, but not another mouse down. And if there are two mouse up or mouse downs coming, like, one after another, the application might crash if it doesn't know. It's similar to that class method, adding the method, similar thing. So you do need some semantics and what's legal, what's not legal, and you want to write that instead of just handling events.
Yeah, so the lower level you go with these events, the more you're going to run into those issues, right? It saves you a lot of work if it works, because yeah, you just put it at the lowest layer that you can, and everything else doesn't have to change, but it does cause issues. So I'm comfortable with the level that I chose because I think that at that level, I get the best of all worlds. But again, other, the Croquet folks are still skeptical of what I'm doing, I think, even if they don't say so. And clearly there are issues there. So going lower would be more of a problem still for various reasons. Performance-wise, yeah, it's pretty damn good, I have to say. The only times I've gotten it to complain is when I have a bug and programmatically it starts some loop and it starts like slamming events, and they are aware of that, and they have a throttling thing that will catch that so that we don't bring their servers down. But so it's basically a result of these were bugs that provoke that. But if you're the normal thing, as you can see, this is incredibly well behaved. You know, so at that level it's fine, but I don't know that I don't know what happens if you go lower. And there is this issue of yeah, different screen resolutions and all kinds of things where this may be a bit of a problem.
Yeah. Well, just a question not to answer, just how to debug this? Like, is there, it's got to be, if there is a problem, it's got to be, sounds like difficult to debug. Or maybe you don't have to. Maybe that's sort of all in Croquet. I don't know.
I mean, so a lot of the credit for this goes to Yoshiki and Vanessa and the people who did that work. And yeah, what I'm doing is using their stuff, and it's no different than debugging UI in general, which is a bit of a pain as well. It's harder to automate. It's whatever. So, which is why it probably, isn't nearly as solid as it should be. But the thing here is, of course, I run it on localhost when I'm debugging, and I can open multiple browsers. I've done experiments on different machines to do it, but again, it's still my machine in the same internet connection, in the same geographic locale and whatever. I can't test it any other way. I've tested it a little bit with people who cooperate with me. Okay, let's try and have a shared IDE session. I did that once or twice. But I can't really, if you're testing this for how it works on scale, yeah, maybe Yoshiki can speak to how they did that, because they have to make sure it really works,
So debugging part, the one big advantage here is that you cannot write server-side code. Everything happens on the client side except that application agnostic event delivering. There's no need to debug the server program. So you can open the Chrome debugger and step through, and you can see like everything. And basically, if you don't care about the network part and the testing part, it's hard. Like we don't have any automated way to like test and stuff, just to manually allocate a remote reflector and see latency and that kind of stuff. But yeah, the regular users don't have to worry about it.
I would have thought some open telemetry stuff could help. Just, you can, there's lots of tools these days that will just like store all the events and help you visualize the sequencing of events and what's going on. Just like, a normal web application, just, the open telemetry stuff is really cool when you sort of see how like, JavaScript events kind of propagate down to your back end, back down to your database and all the way back. I mean, it can't be that dissimilar to all of that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, but there is no database and there's no backend to be debugged. So
I mean, like the open, if you've got sequence IDs on things, open telemetry will help you. Like, they've got like nice, cool visualizations that show you. So, it's just like the Newspeak thing going to the reflector, inside the reflector, from your perspective. I mean, you wouldn't always see that, and then back out again, back to the other clients. I would imagine you could put all of those together and visualize them in some of these tools. Is off the cuff, because like it's a common problem in web stuff. It's just like, hang on a second, what the hell happened? Like, where did you just want to sort of see that sequencing of like this caused this, went here, went all the way there and all the way back. And it's some really nice tools that help visualize that, which you could probably coerce into this kind of world as well. But yeah, it's fancy logging effectively, isn't it? It could be neat.
Yeah. Perhaps.
Yeah, I guess I think the main difficulty I have as an individual developer is, right, it helps to have people who are actually in different locations, so you can even attempt to test this, right? So but it's not really been a problem, because that is mainly the Croquet's problem, making sure that indeed this will work when you're in the UK and I'm in California and someone's in Japan, and they're all collaborating. And does it really work as that? Because yes, as she said, you can actually debug the reflector locally on localhost and do everything there, and supposedly it'll be logical. But then there's always the risk that you put it out there on the internet and so it's not working. Why is it not working? Something got dropped somewhere. It has nothing to do with you, but you have to. I don't know. There's all this mess, but and there are tools for that. But apparently they've got it working. So at this point, it's hopefully less of a concern. It's a solved problem.
The other one that occurs to me when I saw what you were doing to teach all of your components how to do this reflector piece, I'm reminded of, the work in Faro where they've, you can have different kinds of slots, can't you? So you can almost, like the action slot, you could kind of do it in one place. Like, I mean, I guess there's variations of the type of slots, but I guess you see lots of the same sort of pattern. And it feels like, like in your platform, where you're, I guess it's a bit lower level than the platform. It's like, it's almost at the instance variable level that you want a particular, if your UI framework had sort of said this was like a state variable of some sort, then you want to replace that state variable in one place and teach it the same thing. I mean, I guess not a big deal. Like you said, it's probably only like 50 of them, but
so again, these widgets are different, right? So that's how it happened to be in Button,
yeah.
but it's different. I mean,
So many button there's probably like 10 of those button sort of things, and then 2 of the list boxy things. And yeah, maybe you're right.
they're not too many different. It isn't really that is not a big deal. Yes, to some extent you could say, right, in some sense I can say there's an abstract approach, and yeah, there's something common there, but really I don't think there's a need for any special support. It's not really.
And in these days of LLMs, they just write all the dumb code for you, don't they? It's like, it's kind of where it's going, so you don't have to be.
That is controversial, but I think in some cases, yes, they're much better with code they've seen billions of lines of or something. But that's the interesting part. One of the interesting parts is, okay, how well will it do Newspeak? And that's a whole different talk, because there's actually because all the work that's been done has been in the classic IDE kind of the garbage, well, the Eclipse school of thought, shall we call it, which is like static and heavyweight, and you have a column on the side with all the goddamn files, and it is a world away from Smalltalk, and it doesn't have this. So in a Smalltalk universe, I think you can leverage the AI more in the way that a human works. I want it to go and I don't want it to have to know all the APIs, because that's a problem. That's a context size problem. There's things like that. I want it to know what it should ask, go back to the ID, look up that particular thing, put that small amount of in its context, then write some code against this API, and then send me that code, right? So it's more of a bidirectional thing, whereas today the idea, there is you're consulting the AI, and it has to know the stuff that's in there, and that's why it doesn't work so well with larger code bases and more complicated things. The people are working on that all the time, and it's a moving picture. But you think of how a Smalltalk programmer works with a large project, you don't necessarily have to know this whole thing and you have it in your head, right? And especially because it may change all the time. And so it's not worth having it in your, right? We're not talking about like some standard for the web that's been frozen and that this code hasn't changed. And again, the LLM has to keep track of versions and whatever, right? So rather than track that, okay, I need to write this thing with a list. Okay, what's the list API like? And so you ask it to write with the list, it asks you back, show me your list API. Then it says, okay, now I can write you a thing against the list API. So it's a bidirectional connection. So it's basically, in terms, if you're thinking MCP, it's both an MCP client and an MCP server at the same time. So I think that's an approach that I haven't seen tried, and it'll be interesting to see how well it can cope when it has to do that. It just has to know, like a human does, the general language and the syntax, which is pretty much a solved problem.
Yep.
And then it has to solve against small APIs, and it has to be able to reason, which is always has been the weakest point, right? It has to actually think logically. And that, I think, I'll let the overpaid guys at OpenAI sort that out there. It's getting better, and I do not delude myself that we're stuck where we are, and it won't be different in 5 or 10 years. So
You've
this
seen
will
the
get
LLM work in GToolkit?
in what?
In GToolkit, have you seen the LLM work there?
No, I have not at all
Client
looked
has
at.
done some videos on it.
Well, so yeah, Tudor. I have not actually went to look at it, but I saw him post about it. So
Yeah,
I'm sure that is yeah, that is probably a very good thing to look at. I love Tudor's work.
but I worked with it. It works pretty well with, yeah, of course, with local LLMs less well.
Right. So that's a whole other huge topic of discussion, right? Because the smart LLMs are used, out there in the cloud, and the LLMs that you can run locally are punier and not as smart. And I think, again, this will change over time. The technology will evolve, but I think it's actually very important when we're talking about local first. There'll be much less point to local first if you're doing it, and yet all the time you have to go and ask, the LLM in the cloud. So what was the point, right? You still need the network connection and all that. It's also a whole battle of power and control. It's sort of more of a social issue that I don't want these people having all that power. So I would rather have my own AI that works for me and not the other way around.
Yeah.
Could Newspeak run in GToolkit? Or
With
its
support,
UI is very similar, isn't it? Like, I mean, obviously theirs is like, I don't know if there's a second generation, but you started first with a similar kind of idea that
they've done a lot more work, right? Tudor has managed to turn this into a viable concern and therefore fund it and therefore build a lot more. And it's great work. It could, with work,
yeah.
right? So again, Newspeak early experiments, it did not work well on a vanilla Smalltalk machine. Largely because the nested classes means that a lot of instance variable accesses are calls that need to go with a certain semantics up a series of enclosing classes. And unless you had that in the VM, that actually started to show up in performance in a meaningful way. That's the main reason we added bytecodes. But you could have this, you could have the VM that ran both Smalltalk and Newspeak, but it's a fairly, all that stuff is atrophied, right? So, uh, the version of COG that did that one of the reasons I left it was already not being properly maintained, right? Without the Newspeak project funding to pay for it, it got basically didn't get much attention, and so it was.
But they host other languages in GToolkit now, like they run JavaScript and Python. I'm not quite sure. I never quite
Yeah,
worked out
well, I think they play some tricks with calling externally to actually get them to run. They mainly parse and compile them and then analyze them, and when you need to run, they call out and have it run, right? So I don't think no. So then it would have to. Now they could do the same thing with Newspeak, right? They could also call out to a Newspeak engine and do that, and we could have that whole infrastructure looking at Newspeak code. In a sense, Tudor and I are after very much the same thing, right? Except he has the resources to make it actually solid, and I lack the organizational people or business skills to do that. And so, if you think of Ampleforth, it's a live document system. It's very closely related to G-Toolkit. It's done a bit differently. It's done differently again with pros and cons. Apart from the effort and all that, is I am definitely working with the web and with HTML and so forth, which has these. It's both a nightmare and a blessing because it works both ways. Whereas Tudor went and did his own like graphics stack from the ground up, and that works beautifully and lets him do really cool stuff. Some of which is hard even with full HTML, and some things that are easy are really hard with HTML, like getting a decent editor is a nightmare. And so, yeah, but philosophically, we're very, very aligned, right? It really is, and I love his work. Are we there yet?
I'm thinking perhaps we are, and just a big thank you to you for spending so much time with us and sharing all your your journey and your thoughts. It's awesome. It's really cool.
I can talk your head off on this stuff all day long until you beg for mercy, right? So thank you for having me.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, it's really late for you guys. I mean, I spend the time, but you spend the time as well, and it's kind of late in the evening. So
9:30 here, 10:30 for some of the others, I think. So
yeah, it's 10:30 here. It's not bad. All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Gilad. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Talk.